Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his associate Rick Gates were back in court today. They were there for what's called a bond hearing. And that's where a judge reconsiders their home confinement conditions.
It comes after special counsel Robert Mueller indicted Manafort and Gates last week as part of the investigation into Russia's meddling in the 2016 presidential election. So let us bring in CBS News Justice reporter. Do we have your shot is up? We weren't sure if your shot was up. Paula Reid, you are outside of the courthouse. You saw when Manafort and Gates went into court and came back out. What did the judge decide today?
Well, Manafort just left federal court here in Washington, and as he left, that GPS monitoring ankle bracelet was still on his left ankle. His lawyers were hoping today that the judge would perhaps relax some of the conditions for his release. He's currently on home confinement. He has a GPS monitoring bracelet, and he's promised to pay millions of dollars if he doesn't return to court. Now, the judge has said she might be willing to relax some of these restrictions, but first she needs to know that he is posting a sufficient number of assets. And you know whether or not a number is sufficient based on how much someone is worth. But the reason the judge couldn't make a decision today is because still Paul Manafort's net worth is not clear. The government estimates it to be about $28 million. And at this point, the judge says, look, you have not promised me enough assets. You're not offering to post enough assets for me to feel comfortable releasing you from home confinement. Now, interestingly, one of the assets that he has posted is his apartment in Trump Tower. But he went home without any of his conditions being relaxed. But if the government and his defense attorneys can come to some sort of agreement by the end of the day, he may get some relief from that constant home confinement. But the judge says that GPS bracelet is not coming off.
So, Paula, did the judge mention anything about that gag order that she was mulling over last week?
That's a great question, because at the last hearing, she started off by chastising both sides, the lawyers, and telling them, look, this is not a public relations campaign. This is a criminal trial. Stop talking to the press. And she did threaten to gag order. No mention of that today. But you'll also notice that lawyers on both sides have not made any other public comments. So at this point, that remains a threat, and there's no gag order in place at this time.
So where do we go from here? What happens next?
Well, hopefully over the next few hours, the government and defense attorneys will come up with some sort of package that represents a substantial portion of Mr. Manafort's net worth that he can post. And if he can do that successfully, he will be able to travel outside his home, specifically to Virginia, New York, and Florida, where he does business. The judge will not allow him or Mr. Gates to travel internationally, and she's also considering banning them from train stations and airports. But her hope is that lawyers for Mr. Gates and Mr. Manafort can come up with some sort of equation, some sort of offer by the end of the day that the government will accept. And if that happens, then he will be released from home confinement. But again, he can only travel to 3 states, and Mr. Gates will only be able to travel likely between Washington and Richmond, where he lives. But they will continue to be subject to GPS monitoring because the judge is clear. She believes there is a flight risk in this case. And then we'll all be back in court on December 11th to possibly set a trial date.
All right, Paula Reid reporting for us in Washington, D.C. Paula, as always, we thank you.